Okay, we will get started. I know everyone probably has a busy evening and the kids will only stay at bay for so long. So while we have your attention, we'd like to welcome you all. My name is Michelle Ritter and I'm a member of Mercer Island Parent Edge. And we are glad that you've joined us tonight for a conversation about our kids, supporting our kids' mental health. This program is brought to you by Mercer Island Parent Edge, Mercer Island Youth and Family Services, and Mercer Island Pediatrics. This program is our first in the parent support series and will focus on supporting our elementary age students. Parent Edge is part of the Mercer Island PTA Council, which is comprised of PTA representatives from our 4 elementary schools, Islander Middle School, Mercer Island High School, and the Mercer Island Preschool Association. We're excited to offer this program in partnership with Mercer Island Youth and Family Services and Mercer Island Pediatrics as a way to support our families during these challenging times. We know that we can all use extra support right now, and we're so lucky to have all of these experts who are willing to share their evening with us and share some support and tips. For those of you with younger and older children, we did want to let you know that we're planning some additional programs focusing on Islanders preschools and middle school and high school students. So stay tuned for these programs that we hope to offer sometime in early December. Hold on a second here. We do have a wonderful group of panelists for tonight's program, and I wanted to take a moment to introduce them, and they can introduce themselves as well when they speak. We have Polly DeBron, who is a counselor at Island Park Elementary, and she's with Mercer Island Youth and Family Services. We're so lucky to have those counselors in our schools. We also have Laura Falsgraf, who is the Northwood Elementary counselor. We have Dr. Alicia Wang, who's with Mercer Island Pediatrics, and she is new to the practice. So we'd like to welcome her, and I'm so glad that she is joining us. And Dr. Elizabeth Evans, who is also with Mercer Island Pediatrics, and Derek Franklin, who is with Mercer Island Youth and Family Services as well. We did want to let you know that the format for our program this evening is that the panelists will share some information, and then we did want to leave plenty of time for question and answer. We ask that you submit your questions via the chat function, and please keep your questions general in nature. If you have some specific questions, if you can follow up with your school counselor or with your pediatrician after the program, we just want to make sure that we honor confidentiality and that we can help you in the best way we can. So try to keep your questions general in nature. I wanted to introduce my colleague, Lori Cohen-Sanford, who is with Mercer Island Parent Edge, and Lori will be helping with the question and answer session. If you want to put your question in the chat for everyone to see, go ahead and just fill that in. If you'd like it to be anonymous, feel free to send it to Lori and she can ask on your behalf to the panelists. We are recording tonight's webinar and we will send a follow-up recording after the program and with a list of any resources that the presenters will talk about as well as their slides. So if you don't want to take notes, just know that we'll be sending that out. And now I would like to turn over our program to Laura and Polly, who are going to start. If you give me a second, I will stop sharing and allow them to do so. All right.
Okay, Polly, do you have the slides? Okay.
Hopefully you all see them.
Great. Hi, I'm Laura Falsgraf, and so as Michelle said, I am the Mercer Island Youth and Family Services Counselor at Northwood Elementary. I'm also a mom of a 9-year-old who's at West Mercer and a 5-year-old who's in pre-K, all at home. So what I wanted to talk about today is this idea of hand washing for mental health. And as you know by now, washing your hands is a really important step in preventing potential physical illnesses. But we also know that there are a lot of things that we can do to help prevent some potential mental health struggles, such as anxiety and depression. We have outlined here some important hand washing for mental health tips for your family to help reduce and or better manage anxiety, stress, and depression. These tips are comparable to the analogy of laying a foundation to a house. And when it comes to fixing a problem, it's sometimes hard to make corrections when there isn't a stable foundation. So we're going to talk about the hows and whys of preventative measures in parenting, why routine and consistency is so important, and some step-by-step strategies for you and your child. Additionally, I have some trauma-informed approaches to parenting that might be helpful. As a parent myself, and from what I hear from parents in the community, I can say this with a lot of confidence, that we're really stressed. We're stretched too thin. The juggling act is enormous, and our feelings are running high and strong. So definitely, I want to reiterate, be kind to yourself. Compassion is a big part of this, and self-compassion. It's okay for us to feel our feelings and express them. And in fact, it's recommended that we express ourselves in proactive ways and teach our kids to do the same. Feelings of frustration and being overwhelmed, worry, and uncertainty are going to be experienced by all of us at some point. And we definitely are doing the best we can. So with that, I will pass the next bit of information on to Polly.
Thanks, Laura. Hello, everybody. I am the school counselor at Island Park, and so some of you may know me or may not know me. But yeah, just as Laura said, a lot of this is hard, and we're in unprecedented territory here. And I kind of want to think about this as sort of yeah, building a foundation before we jump to some of the complexities of our lives. I think the times that we're in is forcing us to slow down, and especially for mental health, really being able to focus on the basics is really important. So it's important for preventing a lot of potential stress and anxiety, and it's also important for managing it. So before we kind of problem solve into the intricacies of what could be going on with your family and your kids, it's good to really look at what are some of these things that we as a family in order to operate. How are we doing with these things? So these things are sleep. Sleep is very important, especially for kids, to retain information, to rest, to be able to focus. And so looking at how they're sleeping can be a good start. Physical exercise is also a really great way to not only as an outlet for stress and anxiety, but it, produces good hormones and chemicals that help us feel better and help us manage our mood as well. So being able to really try to have kids and family do physical activity every day and have that planned into your schedule. Just being able to get outside. Obviously, weather is a barrier, and the winter hours are a barrier, but when you can, it really can just shift your focus and renew your energy. And so that can be just a quick way to help you just feel better as for your kids and for your family. Nutrition as well, and that can obviously be really tricky, but just really thinking about what we're putting into our bodies and how that affects us. Unfortunately, when we're stressed and anxious, a lot of times our body then craves sugar and fat, and so but that can affect us, and it can affect our focus as well, in not so good ways. So just keeping tabs on that and sort of noting what you're eating. And then of course, just allowing yourself to experience all the emotions that come with the times that we're in, and being able to schedule outlets for that. And have time set aside to experience your emotions, because we can avoid a lot of them. So, and as I talk about these things, I am talking about for kids and for the family. So I think it's important to keep in mind that these are things that work best when the whole family can kind of incorporate them as a whole. And not just focusing in on one kid or another kid. These are things that are good for us as humans, and the kids will really get more out of it the more the family practices these together. So I just want to mention that as well. So the next piece also is also thinking about, with stress and anxiety and depression, to prevent them and also to manage them. An important thing to really hone in on is sort of making it a priority to relax and practice mindfulness. And I'm sure everybody has heard this before. But it's important, and it can be very simple. And part of that is because when we are stressed and anxious, we have physical reactions to that anxiety and to that stress. And part of the way to manage a physical response is with another physical response. So that's why deep breathing can be really helpful, because anxiety brings on you to breathe faster and your heart rate to increase, and all these physical reactions that then can sometimes make the anxiety worse. And if we stop and really focus in on a physical sort of response to that by deep breathing and slowing our bodies down, it can really help manage that. So that's why sometimes these relaxation and mindfulness pieces can be helpful. There's so many different strategies, though, to practice relaxation and to practice mindfulness. So a lot of this too is really just figuring out what works best for you, what works best for your family, what works best for your kid. We're all different and that we respond to things in different ways. So a lot of this is also trial and error. And it can be frustrating sometimes when things don't work immediately, for sure, especially with kids in the moment. But sometimes giving it a chance, or giving it a chance in different environments or different times, also might be helpful. And these are things, just like with anything else, kids have to learn. And sometimes they have to relearn how to manage their own anxiety and stress and things, because they're used to doing things a certain way. So we, as humans, learn how to respond in situations, and sometimes those are helpful and sometimes they're not helpful. So just keep in mind, with each new strategy or thing that you try with kids, they're having to relearn some of these things, which takes time, and sometimes it's not immediate. So some of the popular ones for relaxation and mindfulness are just deep breathing, focusing on your breath, sensory grounding strategies, which is really taking time to pay attention to the environment that's around you. And I practice this with kids of just having them notice, what do they see, what do they hear, what do they smell? And what that does is it kind of brings them back to the present moment, rather than focusing on other things that may be going on in their heads. And then just visualizing a relaxing place, sort of putting yourself there and really noticing how you feel when you're in a calm place or in a relaxing place. And that can be a real place, or it can be an imaginary place of, on an island somewhere, but it works the same way, where it brings your body back to that place, and you feel calm. So these are just some popular relaxation strategies, but again, everybody is sort of different, and there's a ton out there that you can kind of practice and try as a family, or try as for each kid, for what works for them, and have them kind of know what works for them, so they know how what to use when they do feel stressed or anxious. And so I believe Laura's going to take the next topic.
Okay, so we're on to practicing positivity. It is particularly challenging to practice positivity with all the information we take in every day. My husband reminded me of the word doom scrolling. I've been known myself to do some of that, where you just get caught up in what's happening, both just everywhere. Um, but just like the food that we ingest affects how we respond, some ways to increase positivity in your life are listed below. So thinking of things that we're grateful for. Sometimes you can make this a bedtime ritual, listing 3 or 4 or writing them down. I have a client who told me that for the month of November, every day is a day of giving. And so, I think just things like that, rituals that you create around being grateful can be very helpful. And just even noticing the really simple things like the warm feeling of the coffee or the hot cocoa in your hands. When the sun comes out, feeling the warmth of the sun on our face. Appreciating when somebody holds the door for us. Really just being able to notice and appreciate. I have a great appreciation for technology given where we're at right now. And reminding of ourselves of, all that hasn't changed, what hasn't been lost, what have we gained in this process. I certainly have gained closer connections, and in my work as a counselor, I don't just work with the child anymore. I'm working with the whole family. There's a lot of benefits that I have felt have come out of this, despite how difficult of a time this is. Purposefully engaging in pleasurable or soothing activities on a regular basis it can be very helpful. We want to schedule time to read and to draw and to paint, playing with your pet, or baking, watching a movie and playing a game, bubble baths, these are purposeful. Identifying things that you can do for yourself or your loved ones and your community, and focusing on doing these things rather than the things that we wish we could do but can't. That's another practice of positivity. And also focusing on what you can control and not what you can't. And this next slide, I really felt like I wanted to focus in on this for a moment. Some of us might be familiar of this idea of the circle of control. You may be able to see, so the inner circle is the things that we have control of in our lives. The middle circle are the things that we might be able to influence, and the outer circle are the things that are out of our control. So what's in my control? Well, what I read, ongoing learning, what I say, my actions, where I live and work, the friends I choose, my attitude, my spiritual focus, finances, time management. I as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, yeah, some of these are in control, and some aren't. This came out of Franklin Covey. In my community and my influence, and that's yellow circle, the people, who I influence, the people in my life, my family, children, neighbors, and coworkers. And if I'm putting my, focus on what I can control, that's another great way of practicing positivity. I certainly can get caught up in the things that I can't control, like the weather and politics and natural disasters and the stock market and world events. Obviously, the health events of the COVID, injury or illness, actions of others. So I found this to be certainly helpful in reminding myself, like, what can I and can't I control? You can move on to the next slide. Also, creating a daily routine and keeping connected. Most of you by now have heard that schedules are important, but schedules and routines are really important when it comes to helping our kids through difficult times. I sometimes like to think of it as like structure and predictability are the external casts that make our children feel safe and secure. So giving structure to our individual world is helpful when it seems like everything else is up in the air, especially for kids. So here's some helpful ways to develop a routine. Our kids are on their, Zoom class meetings, and then they have their asynchronous, learning times. And the teachers do a good job, like they have structured breaks and recesses. But I also find that as a mom, like I really need to make sure that like my daughter really gets off that screen for that 15 minutes and gets outside. She needs to decompress from the screen, even if it's just a quick 15-minute break. We really need that decompression time balanced with the work time. I need to make sure that we're building in time for fun and building in time for physical activity. And then trying to really keep the bedtime and sleep schedules similar to a typical school year. And I guess I'd add one thing is, at least in my family, getting dressed out of pajamas tends to be helpful, just because it helps shift the mindset. And in terms of keeping connected, this is where I feel really grateful for technology, because we can use technology because we have to practice social distancing. We can use it to see each other, to see family, to see our friends, and connect with people across the country and the world, utilizing it and keeping in touch with coworkers and just fostering those connections with others. Okay, so I'm going to pass it back to you, Polly.
Thanks, Laura. So yeah, I think with all of this, it's also easy just to get bogged down in all the details. And so I really think just generally trying to keep the big picture in mind, of what your family needs and really the times that we're in, and that it's really easy. Obviously, all parents worry about their kids and their emotional well-being, which is obviously normal and okay. But just reminding yourself that also everybody is in the same boat. We are literally, the whole world is in this situation. And so it's I think a lot of parents may feel like their kids are missing out and their kids are, maybe falling behind or whatever it is. But, everybody's missing out on something these days. Not that it makes it any easier, and not that it means that people should not feel feelings about that. But it's just sort of a reminder that we are all experiencing this same thing, and all the kids in the world are gonna be impacted by it in some way. But that kids are also resilient, and kids, luckily, this talk is focused on elementary school aged kids, and elementary school aged kids still have a lot of time to grow and learn, and they have that capability to do that and to get through it. So just keeping that in mind, that a lot of this also is not going to affect your child's long-term success. I think it's really easy to say maybe they're not doing as well in subjects and in school because it's hard to focus, and And it is going to be hard to focus a lot of times right now. And so what is it that they need? And what is it that, do we need to peel back some of the layers to focus on some of those basics and the foundation before we jump to, if they're doing algebra or if they're on the way to algebra, because we can jump to that. And sometimes those focusing on the foundation and the basics, then will help their focus and how they do. So, but keeping that in mind, and then just keeping in mind that kids are also kids, and they, need time to relax and play. And I think a lot of kids are feeling a lot of pressure, and obviously stress about all the change going on right now. And so just keeping in mind that they are still kids, and that's part of their job too, is to be a kid. So just keeping in some of those bigger picture things of where we're at right now, and trying not to get too bogged down in the details, I think can be helpful sometimes. So just remembering that. And then Laura, I think we'll talk about some of the strategies for unwanted behaviors that do come up when kids obviously experience difficult emotions.
All right. So I wanted to create something that's really similar to what we use at school when we're helping students through a difficult experience, whether it's emotion or behavior. So for your house rules, if you wanted to keep those consistent with what we're doing at school, we've really boiled down some of the core things that we're looking for in our students. So the basic expectations of behavior, we're looking for our students to be safe, to be respectful, and to be responsible. And in my house, we've listed those rules and they're hanging on the wall. And then I'm really would recommend that you have some predictable incentives and consequences attached to the above expectations. And an example might be, and I'll just speak to my 5-year-old son who just can find a stick anywhere or turn something into a stick. And, if he's not able to be safe with that, he can't have it. Or we've created a stick zone because he loves swinging. So we have to get kind of creative around, like sometimes we turn that thing that's negative into an incentive, like, looks like you really want to swing right now. Let's make sure that we can get you to the stick zone and find a really cool stick. And this also is easier said than done, but because a negative interaction can be so powerful, the recommendation is that you are reinforcing at a 5-to-1 ratio of positive interaction to negative, or reinforcing positive behavior to negative behavior. And it might mean just really like looking hard for something even simple, like I really appreciate how nicely you're sitting at the table right now. That's a hard one for my kids. They love to walk around and eat. So we're working really hard at that one. I could very much focus on, hey, sit down and have good manners, and get really negative. But I'm trying to shift my energy around to what's the positive that I can find in this moment. Sometimes it's the smallest thing. Something else that we use a lot in the schools is, and I'm using in my own home, is developing a language around feelings and emotions for everyone in the family to use. So we're using the zones of regulation a lot at school. I use it a lot in counseling. I recommend that you look it up. And I actually have a chart that we created in our own home, and there's just tons of resources, and they can be adapted to themes. But what I'd like to say is that if you're focused on the child in your family who's having the struggles, they're going to really feel singled out. But if we adopt kind of a strategy as a family, it really goes better. I am in a family, and we'll talk later about this, but my family operates in the yellow. So they've got high energy. I tend to be more of a green yellow or green blue. But so we are a high energy family. And when you're in the yellow, it's easy to get to red. So it's just kind of good. And then it's a very non-judgmental way of talking about what's going on. And that's one of the things that I really like about the zones of regulation is that there's no wrong or bad zone. It's just what you're experiencing, just like there's no wrong or bad feelings. Next, I'd like to really encourage you to establish a cool down or a calm down area in your home or in each child's room. I think this can be really helpful. I know that sometimes the word timeout can feel a little punitive, and more people are steering away from calling it a timeout. I really like the cool down or the calm down because it's just that's some of the language that we use at school. You could use the word regulate, but it's pretty sophisticated. So anyway, this is where you might have the stuffies or the beanbag chairs or the pillows and blankets or the fidgets. And then finally, I would say that you want to make your relationship with your child your most important tool. And that's just really, building on that trust and safety and connection. Okay, you can move. I want to create a little moment where we can just kind of take a deep breath and laugh. When you're trying to reason with your child, when they're in the red zone, it's not always the most successful intervention. This really reminds me a lot of the little Family Circus cartoon, Eeny, Meeny, Miny, and Mo, and our little friend Jeffrey, I think, or Jeffy, does not want to be a Mo. And no amount of reasoning is going to help him understand that he is not being called Mo. So when we get angry, it's hard. So this is a time where we're going to transition into some information that's specifically trauma informed. And actually go back for just a moment, Polly. Yeah. Before we go on to the next slide, I just would like everybody for a moment, and you may know this model, it's taught in second step, but we use the model of a fist, and in terms of understanding the brain. So go ahead and make a fist, and Polly, go ahead and you can turn to the next slide. I'm going to describe, Daniel Siegel kind of created this model. I'm going to describe kind of the parts of the brain that we're talking about. So when you have your fist, the front fingers, this is the kind of your frontal lobe. This is your cerebral cortex or the prefrontal cortex. And then the part that's surrounding it is your cerebral cortex. So the prefrontal cortex, we like to call like the wise leader. It's kind of like the logical, the reasonable, the calmer part of our mind. But so if we were to open up our hands and our thumb is in the middle, The thumb is symbolic of our limbic regions. So this is the hippocampus and the amygdala. And so this is like where our emotions lie. So and we call it flipping your lid. So when I flip my lid, my amygdala does the talking, and then I can't make my best response. So Daniel Siegel talks about like that this top part of our fist is the upstairs part of our brain, and this is the downstairs part of our brain. So we have our brain stem and our spinal cord. So the upstairs, when we flip our lid, so that could be going into that red zone, the upstairs brain can't communicate with the downstairs brain. It basically goes offline, and logic and reasoning are just not accessible. So there's a lot of really great information, and I would just recommend going online and just searching the hand model of the brain, and I've got some more resources I can talk about. But it's a great way, and it's a really great way to talk with kids about understanding what's happening in their own brain. On to the next slide. So here's just a really simple example of the zones of regulation and the chart. So like I said, there's lots of themes out there. This is from the movie Inside Out, and it just, the characters are so descriptive. And so when we talk about a child or any person, because this is for anybody, the blue zone is really that zone where you're not feeling well. You might feel sick, you might feel tired, sad. It's the moving slowly. Green zone is that zone where you're feeling happy and calm, focused, okay, ready to learn. Yellow zone is more of a worried or annoyed, silly, wiggly, frustrated. And red zone is that angry, out of control feeling, the yelling, sometimes terrified. Things are happening unexpectedly. The green, yellow, and red, you know, when you're looking at strategies, what is it, what do I do when I'm in that zone? You think of it as like the stop sign or the stoplights. Green means go. If we're in the yellow, we need to slow down. And when we're in the red, we need to stop. I'm just going to show you what we have at my own, we're using in my own home. I created this with my kids. And this is just what we're using as a whole family. We identified the blue zone, and so we've identified the feelings: sad, sick, lonely, and tired. And then our strategies, like get a hug, breathe, talk it out, think about something you feel grateful for. So it's a real simple thing, but it could go, it could be very helpful. The green zones we identified as happy, calm, ready to learn, focused. So then our strategies are eat well, sleep well, drink, try to stay focused, take brain breaks, exercise, get outside. And then our yellow zone, frustrated and scared and silly, excited. And so we have be careful, or be mindful, yell outside, go jump on the trampoline, swing, run. And then in the red zone, we have the feeling of anger, mad, out of control, terrified. And in my family, we can get to uber excited. So the strategies would be for our family: calm down. This might be where that calm down space is really important, and taking a break. Getting away, like moving away from the source of anger. Splashing really cold water on your face, or eating a snack, or drinking water, or imagining those peaceful places. So this is just an example of what you might be able to do in your own home. And talking about another strategy. So let's say our child is really escalated. This comes out of Dr. Bruce Perry's work, and Dr. Bruce Perry is a pioneer in a pioneering neuroscientist in the field of trauma. And he's showing us that to help a vulnerable child to learn, think, and reflect, we really need to intervene in a simple sequence. We start at the bottom. And what I guess I want to say is heading straight for the reasoning part of the brain with an expectation of learning, it won't work so well if the child's dysregulated and disconnected from others. So our first strategy is to regulate, and they may need to do this, sometimes intervening in, we see like face-to-face connection. Sometimes our kids need us to give them space. You know your child best and what helps them regulate. So first we need to help them regulate and calm their fight, flight, and freeze responses. Second, we must relate and connect with the child through an attuned and sensitive relationship. And then third, we want to support the child to reflect, learn, and remember. And this is where the reasoning and the learning happens. Go ahead, Polly. Finally, this is like one of my last slides, which is the principles of trauma-informed approaches. If we as parents are building on safety and trust and empowering with choice and voice and honoring strengths and resilience, that we are creating a home that's trauma-informed. I think we have one more slide. And this just last thing I want to say is when we are dealing with trauma, and you could say that our experience with COVID is a prolonged trauma. So a typical developing student or person doesn't tend to have an overactive survival and regulation system. But for a person who's experienced trauma, backing up, so it's not hard if they're in survival mode for a typical developing person to get back to like a cognition for reasoning. But for somebody who's experienced trauma, they have a really well-developed survival system. And this is going to be harder. They have limited resources for cognition. So maybe during a period of time where there is more trauma, we might see those survival instincts being more powerful. So thank you. This was a little longer, but I want to make sure we have time for our doctors here. So thank you.
I did want to mention, I think there's so much great information and we probably could have 2 or 3 sessions. So thank you so much, Laura and Polly. And we will turn it over to Dr. Evans and Dr. Wang.
Thank you so much. Thanks again, Polly and Laura. I really enjoyed looking through your guys' slides and hearing your insights and strategies. I'm Alicia Wang. I'm one of the new pediatricians that's going to be starting at Mercer Island Pediatrics. I'm originally from Bellevue, but coming to Mercer Island sort of by way of Shoreline and Dallas. And Dr. Evans, I'm sure a lot more of you guys are more familiar with, is also on the call, and feel free to jump in if you have anything to add. I'll try to do my best to not go over or repeat any of the topics that we sort of already mentioned. I did want to say that right now, just that this is a very timely discussion that we're having, as mental health amongst pediatrics is a very big topic, not just not just because of COVID, but because it is becoming more and more of an important issue, and more important in children's development. And COVID, I think, has really highlighted that. And brought more attention to it. So this is a very timely topic for us to be talking about now. And I also wanted to talk about why, I mean, aside from obvious things, obvious reasons that mental health is being impacted for these young kids is that COVID is having an effect on these the mental health of these children, not just because people are having to stay at home, but because you know, in the broader scope of things, there are lots of other ways that having a family stuck in the same household has an effect on children's development. I think some of the things that we don't necessarily always think of right off the top of our heads is, you know, increased tensions at home, increased incidents of violence, certainly at home during this period of COVID, not just physical violence, but verbal and emotional. COVID has brought upon us and a lot of families across the US increased financial burden due to people losing their jobs or having reductions in the hours of their jobs, and this causing a lot more financial strain for the families, for the parents, and in a lot of cases, food insecurity and concern where, you know, where the next meal is going to come from or how the bills are going to get paid. And then in addition to that, sort of reiterating this family discord is that any strain that is brought on parents during this time of this pandemic ends up becoming an additional strain for the children as well. So mental health is not just a shared, it's not just something that's impacting parents, but it's a shared burden within the family. And so that's another reason that the pandemic has brought additional stresses. You could go to the next slide, Polly. A lot of questions came up regarding what are some of the signs that we can look for in our children as markers that they are enduring this sort of trauma, which a lot of professionals are saying that this sort of COVID period could be described as a sort of universally shared adverse childhood event for everybody that's going through this. And I'll just kind of quickly go through some of these signs, and they kind of relate to some of the basics that Polly had mentioned, is that, you know, signs of stress can be changes in a child's appetite, either overeating or eating much less than they normally eat. Not necessarily picky eaters, that's a whole nother thing, but changes in sleep pattern is certainly a sign of emotional stress as well. Oversleeping, sleeping much more than they usually sleep, or having difficulty falling asleep, having difficulty staying asleep, waking in the middle of the night. This is more in the extreme cases, but a lot of children can experience regression with emotional stress, and that can be either increased neediness with parents. It can be changes in sort of their attachment with other family members, or it can be bedwetting, which can be seen with a lot of children who experience severe emotional distress. Acting out is certainly something that came up and some parents have had questions about and was touched on by both Laura and Polly. Getting into that sort of red zone that Laura was mentioning. Some children can become withdrawn with signs of emotional distress or emotional trauma, and loss of interest in some of the activities that they may have previously been interested in, or hobbies that they had, loss of interest in wanting to spend time with family members, or loss of interest in wanting to spend time with friends or do virtual sort of activities that they used to like. And I think that you'll find that a lot of children, as they're becoming, you know, more mature, even into the older elementary school ages, that a lot of children have the capacity to express in some way or another, to say actually how they're feeling and what their feelings are. And definitely something that we encourage. But some other manifestations can be they're having anxieties or sadness about something that might not relate to it. So maybe they're not, maybe they're having some anxieties about where did mom go? Like when she went out to the store, she didn't tell me where she went, and now I'm having anxiety about that. Whereas before they may not have had that sort of anxiousness. Polly, could you go to the next slide? And sort of trying not to repeat some of the things that Polly and Laura had mentioned about routine and keeping a schedule is it's also important to allow children to have a space to express their feelings. And I think that this sort of harkens back to what was mentioned in previous slides, is that having that, giving them that space and allowing them to really recognize their own feelings and express those feelings to a parent in a non-judgmental way, and just really reinforcing the fact that listening can be very empowering for children, and listening can be something that is a really powerful tool that parents have, if not for all the strategies that were already mentioned in the slide. Sometimes giving space can also mean giving like a physical space. So just like Laura mentioned, like having that calm down or that cool down area for children to have an independent area where they can be alone and be in whatever color zone that they want to be in is also very powerful. And then I also just want to recognize for sure that as parents, it's very helpful to even be in the same mindset that you're able to recognize that your child is going through a hard time right now, and recognizing that in the scheme of COVID and in the scheme of all the changes and the disruptions that they've had to their normal, it's okay for them to have the feelings that they're having. Next slide. One thing that I have personally noted a lot in my practice is that it's been very, very, very difficult for a lot of families to be physically active, and sometimes that reflects in changes in their growth curve, and that's absolutely one of the number one things that we look at as pediatricians. And I just want to encourage that this is having physical activity and having that outdoor time cannot be underplayed at all. It's so good for your mental health, so great for your physical health, and in a lot of ways is something that's definitely being neglected during the time of the pandemic, as everybody's sheltering in place and trying to stay indoors and stay safe. So I'm really trying to, as the best that I can, to encourage the families that I see to not just have physical activity time, but shared physical activity time with the family. It has been shown that if a family tries to make a habit change together, they're much more likely to succeed. And so that can be something as simple as taking a walk safely outside in a way that's distanced from other people. And then another thing that I've been reiterating to a lot of families is doing as much as you can to really avoid the pitfall of excessive screen time, because screen time becomes not just, school needs screen time, but also fun time screen time. And that can really, that kind of falls hand in hand with the reduced physical activity. I also want to mention that there is a silver lining to this pandemic and the way that we've been handling connectedness, and it's that people have really expressed a lot of creativity in the way that they stay connected with their family, they stay connected with their friends. And I've heard really cute stories about how families are, writing messages to each other on the sidewalk chalk. Today is not the best day to do it since it's super rainy, but those are examples of how families can stay connected with each other and still remain safe. Next slide, please. And then finally, I want to reiterate sort of what Laura and Polly have said, which is that, the most important thing right now and the best thing we can do to help our children is really emphasizing that they can feel secure and safe, and really helping them to feel that. This can be as simple as answering questions really clearly and honestly. Even if you don't know the answer, you can tell them that you don't know the answer, keeping them informed with, changes in the family dynamic, changes in people's health. Those are really clear ways that you can keep kids informed without letting them feel out in the dust and sort of building their anxiety. And then, of course, modeling your sort of own maturity and your own stability is the best way for your kids to feel safe. It's obviously very difficult right now because a lot of parents are going through challenging times that really test their own resilience and mental health. But taking care of yourself is definitely going to be the best way to take care of your children. Next slide. I personally always like to refer my patients to healthychildren.org. They have a lot of really helpful handouts for parents, specifically regarding COVID, it varying from like newborn babies in the time of COVID to teenagers in the time of COVID. They have a lot of really helpful resources, and one of the more recent ones that I've been seeing is how to sort of handle Thanksgiving during the period of COVID, and how to have that kind of discussion with your family. And of course, your other resources, always talking to your pediatricians that are local to the area.
Thank you. That was very much information, and my head is kind of spinning, and there's so much to think about, and as we're trying to help our kids and take care of ourselves. I will put a link in the chat that will direct everyone to the slides that the presenters talked about, so that if you want to go back and review or kind of take notes of things that you had ideas that you wanted to try to implement. And now we know we have lots of great questions from our audience. So I'm going to turn it over to Lori, and Lori's going to share some of the questions that we had.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you to all of our panelists. I did get a number of questions, so I'm going to go based on what has already been sent to me, and then we will try to get to as many additional questions as we can. And so I'm just going to go in the order that they have been received. The first question is, how can parents respond to the physical aggression children express in a productive way? And this wasn't specific to counselors or pediatricians, so I'm going to let you guys take that one. Someone want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll jump in. This is a hard one. I would say that when a child's being physically aggressive, your number one focus is on safety in that moment. And so, you really want to think about the humans and the pets when it comes to safety. Sometimes even though I might be super attached to something, I might allow for paper being thrown or toys in a safe, contained environment versus that child trying to hurt somebody else. It's a tough one, but I'd be curious if anybody wants to chime in as well on that.
So I'll chime in. I think one of the things, just taking a step back about, ignoring certain behaviors and then acting on certain behaviors. So there's going to be a lot more ignoring of certain behaviors during this time period, the whining, the stomping, the talking back, some of that we're just going to have to let go because these are stressful times. So just like we were talking about, finding the positives and not all the negatives, I think sometimes we have to ignore certain behaviors. But when it comes to aggressive behavior, like Laura said, I don't think you can just ignore that behavior. And one thing I would say is that we know from toddlers that most often it's one parent or both parents, the ones that they feel safest with, that they will be most aggressive with, right? So a lot of times mom got bit when the child was 15 months, but is a perfect angel around dad. And so, we always say we're hardest on the ones we love the most because we know there's some forgiveness there. But I, first of all, would reassure that it's not unusual that one parent is singled out for aggressive behavior. One comment that I would make about aggressive behavior is the cool down period, that we can't reason with the child when they are acting aggressively, that everybody needs to take a cool down. I need to take a cool down. The child needs to take a cool down, whether that's a timeout that you've established or that cool down space, and then coming back to that behavior later when everybody's calm and maybe trying to brainstorm, what were you feeling? What can we do in circumstances like that if you're feeling that way again? Talking through it in that way might be helpful. But there has to be consistent structure and consistent consequences, especially when it comes to very aggressive behavior like hitting, kicking, biting, those actions.
Okay, thank you. The next question is, this was for pediatricians, but also, as I think to all panelists, do you have suggestions for physical activities, like workout videos for elementary kids, stretching videos, just helpful suggestions for physical activity indoors on the rainy and coldy days we all know we have ahead of us? Everybody spoke about the importance of getting outdoors and the importance of exercise, but sometimes we all know that indoors is really the way that we have to go.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I talk about is we always send our kids when they were in school with a raincoat and shoes that we knew that they could go stomp around in. And we knew that unless there was lightning and thunder and just torrential downpour, our kids were going to go out for recess. And yet when we're at home, it seems like such a foreign concept to send our kids out for that little 15-30-minute break between classes that we know that they need some of that. So I would say have those, rain boots ready and that good waterproof jacket and still send them outside for those breaks, just like that would happen at recess at school. I think everybody knows what I'm talking about there. I have a lot of families that are using workouts online. I know we're talking about decreasing screen time, but I think doing a little yoga video, Cosmic Kids is a great one. There's lots of workout videos. The PE teachers have made them, and do them with your kids. Do some, jumping jacks or jump rope or things like that. A lot of people are clearing out their garages because they don't really love the rain and setting up little obstacles in there. That's a great idea on these cold days. Do you have any other recommendations, Alicia?
I agree. A lot of those ideas were definitely some of the ones that I've shared with my patients as well. And I think that as much as I try to really emphasize that it doesn't necessarily have to be like a full 1 hour workout or whatever. It can be something really short and, like a 15-minute walk, and it can be a couple times in a day or a couple times before noon. And that can make a world of difference. So I think just small steps too is a good place to start.
And thank you. And I see a couple of things in the chat that I'll read out. One is Just Dance on Wii was suggested. And then someone else is suggesting an exercise game called Ring Fit Adventure for Nintendo Switch. The whole family does that one together, and it's been really fun. And then Peloton app, which you do not need Peloton bike to have, has some kids classes, and there's a free 30-day trial. So there's some other suggestions coming in from our parents. Okay, thank you. The next question is, do any of the panelists have tips for increased test anxiety during remote learning? Any just helpful tips for the kids who are getting more anxious about taking tests in that remote environment?
We have a great mindfulness curriculum that we use at Northwood, and there's a specific one that we do with the kids that is all about test taking and what you can do. So we walk them through like a guided sort of meditation where they're experiencing, you know, those feelings and how they can stop and take a break. So they visualize themselves taking the test, and then they visualize what that overwhelmed feeling is like, and then they visualize, and then they do the breathing. So it's a really helpful strategy. So I would do, like, when they're feeling calm and grounded and like in a space to practice, I would encourage that practice of what tips, you know, like you've got your water bottle next to you. So take a drink of water, close your eyes for 15 seconds. And, you know, one of the things with anxiety, and I was going to mention this before, is there's a term called parasympathetic breathing. So you're taking a quicker and a shorter breath in and a longer and slower breath out. And that can send a signal to our brain to calm down. So even practicing those, like 3 parasympathetic breaths. So that would be one of the suggestions that I would have, is just using those mindfulness strategies.
I'd also like to add that with all this going on, normal day-to-day anxieties are going to be exacerbated. And so while test anxiety is also normal, it is going to be heightened. And kids are feeling more pressure, though, with just different platforms of taking a test and not feeling comfortable with managing some of these platforms and having to be on screen. And so I think part of the managing test anxiety is also potentially having a conversation with your teacher too, and being aware of the own pressure that you may be putting on your kid to do well in this moment. So when I, talked about keeping up with the basics and keeping the big picture in mind, test anxiety, I think sometimes kids can internalize from the messaging that they're getting from their own parents, thinking they want them to do well. So part of that is just reassuring them that it's okay, do the best that they can, and trying not to put as much pressure on the testing, to be honest, and having that conversation with the teacher of is there anything we can do to help them manage this platform or something like that. So that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and I'd like to add that there's a lot of emphasis on, oh, my brain is going to totally blank on me, but on really that we need to fail in order to learn. And so why am I, Polly, can you help me? What's the word that I'm thinking of? Growth mindset. Thank you. So the whole growth mindset is so important, and it's all about that's how we learn. We need to stumble, we need to fall, we need to make mistakes, and that is absolutely part of the learning. And that FAIL, the acronym for FAIL, is first attempt in learning. So I think the more your child can understand and hear that that will also help to reduce anxiety. And I have to say that I know so many kids whose parents are so incredibly easy with them and really take a ton of pressure off of them. And yet that child puts so much pressure on themselves. So I feel like I hear that more than I'm hearing parents putting the pressure on, is the kids are doing it to themselves. So I'm hearing that a lot.
Okay, thank you. This next question is, how about tips for productively dealing with tension between siblings with all the increased time that they are spending together at home? Sure, this is common to every household with more than one child in it. Tips?
I could take this one too. I'm not sure I can totally. So yeah, this is like the mom part of me speaking. So my kids can either be best friends or worst enemies. And there's a 4-year age difference. So my daughter really needs a playmate, and her little 5-year-old brother is not the best at being her playmate. And developmentally, of course, that makes a lot of sense, but they're the ones that have each other. So it's a moment by moment, day by day thing. But what I would say is the systems that we have in place, like the basic expectations of behavior, being safe, being respectful, being responsible, the cool down spots, the talking about the zones. Like I might say, you know, your brother is really high in the yellow zone right now. Do you think that maybe now might not be the best time to try to play this imaginary game where you're dictating all the rules? Like, how about like 15-20 minutes of alone time, and then let's come back and see where we're at. I would say that that's the thing that helps me as a mom the most, is having these systems in place. And then I can like use them in the moment to help my kids. Sometimes I let them just like duke it out, and then not really duke it out. Like I don't really let them hurt each other, but just I go to a place where I'm just a little bit uncomfortable to see, can they solve this on their own? I also do have Kelso's Choice hanging in my house, and Kelso's Choice is wonderful because it can be used anywhere. And I talk about, and I ask my kids, if they're in the red zone, I might just say, is this a big problem? Is this scary, dangerous, hurtful? And then they like think for a moment. And if the answer is no, they do come down a bit. And I'm like, all right, let's problem solve. What choice do you have? Go look at the wheel. Those are the things I'm trying. And I'm successful sometimes and not at all others.
Thank you. Does anyone else have a suggestion for tips on sibling tension?
Okay. Hey, Lori, this is Derek. I can chime in real quick. I'm with Youth and Family Services. And one thing I might consider that some parents try is finding some time just to remind their kids of their uniqueness. So finding a way to isolate the kids, spend some one-on-one time, special time for younger kids. It's kind of play time, but remind each of the kids what their role is in the family. Each kid may have something different. It's a special chore. It's a special task. It's something about them that's unique. I think spending so much time together, sort of the emotional process and boundaries can blur really easily. So all the supportive family things that we've heard from other panelists, I think also with siblings, reminding them how they're unique, different, and special without being too coy or overdoing it. But finding those differences can help them have a little sense of identity that can separate themselves from the contest and the competition, some of the other conflict with their sibling.
Thank you, Derek. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, let me read this one from the chat. This one came in pretty quickly after, so I didn't have a chance to write it down. Hold on. All right, well, I can't find it right now, so I will do my best. This was about loss of interest in hobbies. If a child is experiencing a loss of interest in hobbies they previously enjoyed, what is the most productive way for parents to be dealing with that? Should they reinforce that they shouldn't quit a hobby, or should they allow that child to give that up during this time? We all know that the things that were really fun to do with other kids are not happening to the same degree. So I'm assuming this might be something like that.
So I think that I guess I'll take this question since I referenced it on my slides. I think it is contextual. So definitely, I don't think it's a good idea that if your child is having a loss of interest in something, that they be forced to participate in it. And I think that can sometimes be counterproductive for your cause. And I think that, you know, in these kind of situations where it can feel like the pandemic has created like taken away a lot of choices, I think giving children the choice between a couple of options can sort of give them that power back. And it might not be all the choices that they really wanted, but giving them those choices is better than forcing them into something. I don't know if anybody else has any input on that.
I would just piggyback that I wouldn't let a child leave all of their previous hobbies or interests, right? I've seen mostly with older kids, because they've been forced to lose a lot of their sports or activities, that they become the bump on the log with the video games all day long, and that kind of can become a vicious cycle. So I agree with Alicia, giving them that choice, but suggesting that maybe they try something else to fill that time, that there needs to be something else outside the home, whether, when I say outside the home, I guess I don't mean unsafe, but and during a pandemic, but there needs to be some activity to replace that, whether it's physical or bringing in that creative side, or whether it's music or a social club that they belong to, you know, something to fill that time, I think is still really important.
Thank you. I have a question here that may have already been answered, but I'm gonna go over just in case we didn't, if there's might be something new. This one is about, I had a lot of questions about helping kids who are having trouble concentrating with Zoom classes and remaining focused during classes and during the asynchronous homework time. Are there tips to help kids focus?
Well, I think there's a lot there. I think having a structure is really important, especially with younger children. I feel like time is something that's very hard to comprehend. And so if there's no endpoint in sight, sometimes it's just overwhelming and very distracting to them to finish something. So chunking out the day between, okay, we're going to work on this for 30 minutes and then we're going to do outdoor time, or we're going to play a board game, to break it up so that it's not 2 hours of we have to, you know, get this homework done in the next 2 hours, because that's just an awfully long time to pay attention. I think we all can admit that it's hard for us to be on a Zoom call for an extended period of time. That engagement is really difficult for all of us. So I think, again, taking those breaks between and making them shut off their computer and run outside, do some jumping jacks, run around the room a couple of times, really to break up those sessions is so important. And making sure that they're sleeping well so that they are well rested and can pay attention easier.
Does anybody else have tips on that? Thank you, Liz. Does anybody else have tips on that question, or?
Yeah, along the lines of, and we ended up talking with my daughter's teacher about this. Her workstation is in a way that she can stand and do her Zoom calls as well, so that she's not just sitting the whole time. So she's able to move her body while she's on class. And so far it's worked out pretty well. She's not that distracting. She's allowed to have one fidget. So that can be helpful. And for some families, their child responds well to the clocks. Like sometimes teachers will have a clock where it just shows the amount of time and the time will shrink. Those can help the younger kids kind of get a better concept of time. My kids will stare at the clock more than they will than getting their work done. So it doesn't work in our family, but it really has worked well for some others.
Thank you. Well, I know we're getting close to our end time, so I'm gonna ask one more, and I apologize for, I think there was like just a couple people who had questions I didn't get to, and I think we could go on with this all night, but I'm gonna just kind of do a wrap-up question here, which is, what should all parents know to make them feel like we're all in this together? And what do each of you think the top priorities for parents should be during this time to support well-being in kids? Maybe if everybody wants to kind of go through and give their top priorities for parents to keep focused on.
I can go ahead and jump in and go first. Yeah, I think one of the things to focus on as a school counselor, honestly, is letting your kids know that emotions are normal and that they're going to have them, and that that's a part of being a human, and that part of feeling distress and stress is part of the learning process also. And so it is really hard to watch kids go through difficult situations, but that's also how they learn, and allowing them to feel that frustration and feel that anxiety and be able to manage it in helpful ways is really going to be a big part of helping them with the learning process as well. So so focusing in on those emotions and allowing them to feel that. And yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, and I would add that as a mom, my 5-year-old's knocking on the door right now. But I think just prioritizing, really kind of like when it comes down to assignments and this list of tasks that we have to check off, I just put my child's well-being and mental health at the very top of my priority. So I might just say, we need to just set this aside for now and focus on getting through this moment and being okay. And it might just be, we need to put everything aside for the night and we're done, and we need to just be together as a family and feel good and calm down. And I just sometimes, it flies in the face of what the teachers are asking of us or of our kids, but we as parents are that ultimate authority when it comes to our child's well-being.
I think I really liked one of the points on Polly's slide, which is that I think it's important to recognize that we are all going through a very similar situation. The pandemic is affecting everybody, and I think, everybody's putting in their best effort, and that's also a very important sort of self-recognition for parents to have at this time, is that you're doing your best, and parents need to take care of themselves through this process as well.
So I think there's some vulnerability in all of us, and sharing that with our children, and learning to problem solve together. This is new for all of us. Usually the parents are the ones in the know, and we can answer everything so confidently, and we know what's going to happen, and this is the best. And now we're in the same boat. So how can we problem solve this together? And I think that's an amazing experience that we can give to our kids, that we're all learning this together, and what's going to work for our family. And working through those ideas. There's some positives and there's a lot of negatives, but there are some positives to this. And so finding those positives in this time, I think, is really important.
Derek, did you have anything, or did anybody else have any final thoughts on that?
Oh, thanks, Lori. Just quickly, I guess I'd recommend that parents with kids avoid the should trap. There isn't a right way to experience some of these feelings for everybody. There's not I should be doing this, I should be feeling that. It's going to be different for everybody, and to give kids and yourselves the space to do it in a way that's right for you. There's no extra points for doing it longer or shorter or briefer or taller, but there is some grief out there and some joy to be had, but just be careful when we're trying to control so much not to get stuck in too many shoulds.
Okay, well, I am going to hand it back to Michelle to leave us off. And Michelle, there have been a couple of questions about whether or not this is being recorded and how people can access the presentation after. So if you could just remind people of that, that would also.
Thank you. It is being recorded, and we will post it to our website, as well as send out to all of the people who are registered for the program. And we'll also have the slides available. I put that in the link earlier, but I will send it out to all of participants as well. So just a lot of great information. And I was telling the counselors and the pediatricians, sometimes we just need to see those friendly faces in our community to reassure us that it's all going to be okay. And I'm sure all the parents on this call will agree that we miss seeing other parents at drop off and pickup, or our kids' sports, or meeting at a coffee shop and saying, you know what, this is happening with my kid. Is your kid experiencing the same thing? And I think this has just been really reassuring to hear that, you know what, a lot of us are experiencing the same things, maybe not on the same day, but we will get through this, and to all just give ourselves a little bit of grace and realize that, I saw a quote at the beginning of all of this that said, if we can just come out mentally intact, we're going to be fine. It's not a year to like leaps and bounds. It's not a year for us to strive for the highest achievements. We're really just going to get through this and enjoy the silver linings that we've all found along the way. So thank you so much to all of our panelists, to our pediatricians and our school counselors for all of the work you do to keep our families safe and together. And we look forward to more of these programs. As I mentioned, we're hoping to do one for our younger kids and our older kids. So stay tuned, and thank you all very much, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving, cozy at home, hopefully. And thank you. Have a good evening. Thanks so much.